Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So before we get into Georgina's letter, I just want to reintroduce my colleague and teammate, Cody. Cody, would you like to share with everyone a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a dating coach that specializes in attachment theory. I'm also a clinician, and I see clients primarily virtually nowadays, offering one-on-one sessions, um, whether it's with avoidant attachment or anxious attachment or kind of just general relationship stuff that's going on.
And for today, we are going to be covering what Georgina has sent through us. So let's get started. Georgina writes, first, let me start by saying thank you for your content. You're very welcome, Georgina. She writes, I'm 42, newly-ish divorced. I was married for over 20 years, so you can imagine how new all of this dating stuff is to me. My ex cheated on me with my friend 10 years into our marriage. It was never the same after that, and I made the decision to file for divorce early 2023. In the middle of the divorce, where I've already moved out, I went out with my boss, Nick. By this time, I'd been working remotely part-time for him for about 2 years. Things escalated, and well, we had sex that night. Things continued. Dates, constant texting, etc. He even shared his location, which is something not even my husband did. We never had the official conversation as to what we were doing or what we were. I came to the realization a few weeks in that I was in a situationship. 6 weeks in, he said, I love you. And I asked, are you sure? He said this was years in the making. He always had a thing for me, but never acted on it, obviously, because I was married. Things progressed. I met his family and even met his son that not even his ex-wife knew about. That's a whole other story in and of itself. However, anytime I brought up meeting and doing anything with my family, he always had an excuse. Or he'd tell me he could go to be with me only to like, oh, sorry, let me start that sentence again. He'd tell me he could go out with me only to cancel last minute due to work. He owns two businesses, and I knew going in that they were his number one priority. I fell hard for him, as you can imagine, with me being checked out of my marriage for 10 years and him being the first one in my life post marriage. I was really keen for a new lease on romantic life. He's always been pretty bad with regards to communication, and he rarely initiates conversation. I noticed anytime I asked questions about his life, it's like he got bothered. By this time, I was just too emotionally invested and accepted that communication wasn't his forte. I always had issues speaking up and setting boundaries, so I just kept acting and accepting the bare minimum. He started being very hot and cold towards the end of 2023. Okay, let's pause here. There is so much that Georgina has shared. Do you want to take a moment to share your thoughts on this, Cody?
So this is the first guy that she dated after her divorce, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct. Well, I was going to say, to me, even though this might be considered dating, it's not like she was actively out searching for a partner at this particular point in time. It seems like one thing led to another.
And this was her coworker. Did she
Her
say boss
boss.
or coworker? Her
Boss.
boss. Okay. So we're already off to a rocky start, and this is the making of a situationship a lot of times. And I've had clients that have reached out to me telling me very similar stories. They start flirting with the boss, and then one thing leads to another, and then next thing they know, they're catching feelings, but the other person's not reciprocating. But on top of that, there's also the power dynamic that has to be taken into account. So if it does go south, then you're looking at some tough logistical choices.
Yeah, and I also want to say too, it seems interesting that it almost reads as though he really initiated a lot of this. Like it sounds like, to your point about the power dynamic, it seems like the boss of Georgina really kicked this off in that it seems to me like he's had these feelings for her, and she was also technically unavailable to him because she was already in a committed marriage. And then as soon as that ended, it seems like one thing led to another and he acted on it. And I want to say separately, but I feel like it could be connected. Going back to Georgina's past, like she's had it pretty rough. Like, poor woman, she's, been married for over 20 years where her husband, her ex-husband, had cheated on her with her friend, with, a mutual friend 10 years into the marriage. So there's already some significant betrayal. And I could understand as that marriage has ended, Georgina would probably be very, very vulnerable to someone like her boss, Nick.
Yeah, and I definitely get the sense that there's a lot of fantasizing and idealizing on her part. She hasn't necessarily explicitly said that, but just based off of the facts of the situation, she's probably projecting a lot of things onto this boss, and then the facade starting to crumble in front of her eyes. So I'm curious to see what she's going to say next, for sure.
I was going to say, I thought he also was idealizing her as well, too, because I mean, for him to say things like, I love you 6 weeks in, I know that he's known her for a while, but like, to me, I'm like, whoa, like, hold your horses. There's a lot already from his side as well.
For sure. Yep. And I'm starting to see the trail of the avoidance cycle starting to form. The love bombing and then the slow pull away.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And there was something else I was going to say too. I guess before we move on, I just want to say, Georgina, to be fair to you, like, I mean, it seems like you're very new to a lot of this stuff, and it's not your fault. Like, I mean, society doesn't exactly equip people with the knowledge on attachment theory, on these kind of dynamics and how vulnerable we are to them. And I am almost wondering if you've had a childhood history where you've experienced betrayal, cheating, divorce, or something else, because to me, your history with your marriage seems like there's so much wrapped up in that. And I almost wonder if some of that is like, recurring stuff that you've already experienced growing up. So yeah, that's the last of my 2 cents for this before we continue on. But yeah, it seems like, as you were saying, Cody, the facade of who this guy appeared to be is starting to crumble. That just because he seems to have poor communication skills, that seems to be a symptom of his avoidance.
For sure. I don't see a lot of healthy, happy relationships being formed right off the heels of a divorce. It doesn't usually happen.
No,
Or from a divorce, at least.
especially one where there's like been like a lot of betrayal as well too, because you usually need to recover quite a bit before you go back into dating as well too. You need like a breather to really like ground yourself and reflect on what you're looking for next.
Yep. I'm curious to see where this goes.
Me too. Something tells me this is not going to be an exclusively fun experience. So when Nick was loving, he was all in, but when he was cold, he was a totally different person. For example, his son came into town around Thanksgiving time and he would set up a date for us to go out and spend time together. He even met my son that night, which made everything just seem so real. We went out of town after Christmas with his dad and stepmom, We had a great time, but then New Year's Eve of 2023, he truly made me feel like shit. I felt so alone that night, even though he was right next to me, completely cold. We didn't even kiss at midnight because he was quote unquote tired at 11 p.m. and went to sleep. I decided to have a talk with him a few days later and asked if he wanted to end things. He said he didn't, but that work had gotten a lot busier and stressful, so I left it alone. I forgot to mention the sex was always extremely passionate, so no issues there. Okay, so just pausing here. So it seems like physical intimacy, not so much of an issue, which it can be in a lot of these cases, but it does seem as though there's a real hot and cold to him on certain nights. It's interesting how you'd seemingly had such an intense time around Thanksgiving, and then shortly after New Year's Eve, he's really shut down and very cold. Seems like he's gone into his freeze. I'm sensing we're getting into dismissive avoidant land. I don't feel like this is fearful avoidant. That's a hunch I have. What are your thoughts?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of signs of anxious behavior on his part or the hot cold. It's more so just like this gradual freeze out that appears to be happening. I always think it's amusing too. This is kind of as a common avoidant thing where they get very tired at nighttime when it is time like to touch base with each other and exchange emotions and to kind of rehash your day and to connect. It seems like avoidants don't always do well with that part of the day or the night.
Yeah, funny that. I mean, I know someone said to me once, do you think they have like avoidant narcolepsy? And it's like, it's not even that. It's just that they just don't have the bandwidth. I think they shut down because it's too much for them.
Yep. So that's also yeah, very common of dismissive avoidance, which again, it doesn't seem like she has a lot of knowledge of attachment styles and she's walking into this situation here.
I would agree. I would agree. It sounds to me like his bandwidth for love and emotional connection is tiny, but he shows up as 110%, even though his capacity is probably only 40.
For sure. I like the avoidant narcolepsy term. I'll add that to the growing inventory here.
Yeah, the lexicon's growing, isn't it?
It's ever growing. I love it.
So, March of 2024, a year in and divorce being official on paper months prior, Nick and I got into an argument via text. I still didn't have a title and I knew I was accepting less than I deserved, so I mentioned a label. He texted me and said this wasn't the kind of pressure he needed at the moment with everything going on at work. Oh, that's something I forgot to mention. Nick's got two jobs that he owns. So already to me, my brain's like, okay, so this is a man who's already married to his entrepreneurship, which makes me think she's not, poor Georgina, she's never going to be first. And I think people forget that with avoidance, it's like when they are a workaholic, that is the same as being an addict. You are not going to pull them away from that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Avoidants tend to marry themselves to their jobs, which lends itself to emotional unavailability, which is actually part of the intention in the first place, whether they're conscious of it or not. So they arrange their lives in a way where they don't have to be emotionally vulnerable. One of the best ways to do that is to keep saying, "Hey, I'm at the office. I got to work late." It's a pretty, legitimate sounding excuse for not being there.
Exactly. And I think the danger of it is it's very easy to rationalize as well too, because you just keep thinking, oh, well, they're busy. It's like, no, it's part of their survival strategy. Anyways, Nick said we talk about this issue later that week, and as he was out of town, he called me a few days later to end things with the excuse of, you deserve better. I can't give you the time and attention you deserve. Work is getting busier, etc. Although it broke my heart. I knew it was for the best. I feel like, Georgina, you may have been saying that in the moment because, part of you was just like, I don't want to deal with the anxiety of this situation any further. But I could imagine a part of you probably didn't feel that way as well. I imagine a part of you probably felt like, no, I still really want to be with Nick because he's amazing. And what a dismissive, avoidant line. You deserve better. I can't give you the time and attention you deserve.
Classic for sure. Also, too, I wanted to circle back a little bit to she pushed for the label, and that's when he brushed that to the side, dismissed it. But the right person isn't going to see that as like a confrontational ask. They're going to be excited. They're going to be happy that you brought it up in conversation. They would have been like, hey, I was going to just bring it up myself. Now we can have this conversation. That's awesome.
Yes, I agree. And to add on to that, though, it's still pretty fucking scary when you've had the same guy who's told you, I love you 6 weeks in, then almost walks that back completely to, I can't give you what you deserve.
Yep. So that avoided deactivation, hitting hard.
Very much so. Anyways, Georgina continues. I did go over one night where he wasn't home to take a few of my things from his home. One thing I forgot, not on purpose, was a black gown, and I'm going to refer back to this later. I continued working for him remotely and went no contact in the sense of relationship conversations. Anytime I wanted to text him, I texted him my notes so I could get it off my chest but not actually send it. This is when I came across your content, Ken, and became a follower. I learned about attachment styles and realized that he was the epitome of a dismissive avoidant. Yes, I diagnosed him. Just for anyone listening, attachment styles aren't a diagnosis, so go ahead, diagnose anyone. Like, it's not really going to be the end of the world. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it should be a diagnosis because that would really help a lot of people. But as far as I'm concerned, you can have at it. I mean, I don't know about your thoughts on that, Cody.
Yeah, for sure. It's just helpful for people to have a label for a lot of things. They can conceptualize it better in their own head, and then they can make informed choices. And it sounds like she's starting to use some of her coping skills at this point, and then she found your content, which is great. So she's getting more educated on it. So that way it doesn't happen in the future again.
Yeah,
At least
exactly.
she minimizes risks.
Yeah, 100 billion percent. And I think when you have language to describe your experience, it really does help to be like, and now I can see the forest from the trees. Anyways, Georgina adds, I realized I had anxious attachment tendencies. Very good. And I started working on that for myself because I knew for the sake of future relationships, I needed to become more secure. It's something I continued working on to this day throughout therapy. Okay, so right after this breakup, a guy from Instagram, Jason, came into my life. Initially, I ignored him, but after a persistent 2 months, now May of 2024, I decided to give him a shot. Jason was everything I ever wanted Nick to be: thoughtful, communicated feelings, FaceTime daily, sent me flowers to work. Oh no, don't tell me this guy's a dismissive, leaning, fearful. Like something tells me I feel like Jason's going to be like a very different kind of guy. So, anyways, he wrote me notes and he was affectionate. The whole everything. I started to really like him. Nick, however, was still in the back of my mind. Since things were going well with Jason, I decided to ask Nick for my gown, which is the one I left at his home. I felt it was the last piece of me left at his home, and one thing I needed to get to fully start attaching. Nick dropped my gown at work and didn't say a fucking word. Nothing. Mind you, by this time we hadn't seen each other in months. 2 weeks later, now into July, Jason broke up with me. Oh. His ex came back in the picture, and Jason breadcrumbed later, but I quickly put an end to that, and that was the end of Jason. Okay, wow. So presumably another avoidant, although that story ended very quickly. You're doing very well for yourself to have gotten rid of him very quickly. I'm not surprised about Nick still being 2 months, still very shut down. I want to take a moment here to say this to people in general, in case they don't understand this. I know a lot of people wait expectantly for their avoidant partner to, resume having feelings for them. And depending on the avoidant, that may not happen for years. So, to be honest, when I read this, I'm like, I'm not surprised.
It's also common for avoidants to monkey branch to other partners after a relationship ends or they discard. So that's another reason why you might be waiting the entire rest of your life for an avoidant to come back around because they've already moved on with someone else, or they've already discarded that partner and they're on to the second, third, fourth person. What are your thoughts on? I don't really know the exact timeline in my mind right now of her dating here, but what is your thoughts on how she is jumping into these different situations?
Okay, I've got mixed thoughts. I think sometimes post breakup, it's good to go to dating at some point when you're feeling like, okay, I need that exposure therapy to just allow myself to get back out there, use some of this language I've learned from attachment theory, and just allow myself to feel comfortable to get back out there. I wouldn't recommend it straight away. I think that's dangerous. I worry, given that the fact that there's a bit of rush here, that something makes me wonder. I wonder if Georgina is rushing to get back out there quickly and isn't taking some time just to integrate some of this stuff. But again, I should be very honest. Knowing me, I'm the kind of guy where I can go without for a very, very long time, and I know not everyone's like that. So they're my mixed range of thoughts on this.
Um, I had another question. It'll pop back in my head here. Yeah, I also get the same impression too, where I don't feel like she's fully processing these breakups and then centering herself and then being intentional when she gets back out there and starts dating. Because she mentioned that this recent guy basically slid into her DMs on Instagram. Um, but how would you answer the question of like, when should I put myself back out there?
When you are no longer in a position where you necessarily want to, actually, sorry, let me start that sentence again. Because I got to remind myself, how did I do this? I know for me, when I really started dating again was when I was no longer looking for my ex and a new partner. When I was in a position where I wanted a fresh experience and and I wasn't fully healed by any stretch of the imagination, but I didn't have any outcome in mind where I thought if I date, this will bring my ex back to the picture, for instance. So it's when I started doing it for myself more than anything else.
I think that's fair. Because sometimes people will ask me, well, I don't know, I don't feel like I'm ever going to be 100% healed, or what does that even look like? So should I just not date forever?
No.
And obviously the answer to that is no. And there might be triggers that you always have when it comes to associations to that previous partner. Like there are certain exes where we did not end on good terms. If I see them out, it's not going to ruin my entire day at this point, but it's also not going to be pleasant necessarily, because just based off of our personal dynamics together, we're just kind of oil and water. And but I came to that understanding that we're never going to work out. And I think that's that kind of fresh start that you're referring to here, where it's like, okay, I understand there's no future there, and I want a future elsewhere, and I'm firmly grounded in that reality. But it doesn't mean that the triggers completely go away necessarily. They definitely get better. It's like you're not suffering on a day-to-day basis. But I mean, I also don't believe that you can generally be friends with exes, unless it's been a long time since you dated.
You and I are on exactly the same page, Cody. Like I'm just not a I just think for emotional health and well-being, don't try it. Like it's not a good idea. I think, and I'd say just close that door with the intention of just working on yourself. But I mean, not everyone's there yet. I get it. It's for everyone to figure out in their own time. Anyways, Georgina continues, a month after that breakup with Jason, now at the end of August 2024, I posted a picture of myself at a bachelorette party. To my surprise, I got a like from Nick. This man would never like anything. Never. So you can imagine what this did to me. Later that night, I had two missed calls from him. By this time, we'd been in no contact for 6 months besides work, and my heart dropped. My initial thought was something happened to him or his family. I texted him since I was in a loud bar and asked if he was okay and asked if he meant to call me. He replied, yeah, I'm okay, and yeah, I did mean to call you both times. So I called him back. He proceeded to cry and told me he'd never stopped loving me, said he knew I was quote unquote his person, and he missed me. And he asked if I was still with what's his name. He said that dropping off my gown was one of the hardest things he'd ever done in his life. Said he really knew he self-sabotaged every relationship because of his communication issues, but he was really trying to get better. I heard a vulnerable side that I literally had never heard before, ever. I, in turn, let him know how he made me feel for a year, how I felt alone even though I was next to him, how I accepted the bare minimum, how all I ever wanted was a title. He apologized over and over and said he knew he fucked up and took full accountability. I told him we needed to talk sober in person because I knew we'd both been drinking. Okay. There's so much that I could say to that, but before I do, I just want to finish this next paragraph. The next day, I didn't hear anything from him, so I decided to text him late that evening to ask if he still wanted to talk or was that all liquid courage. He said yes. We met up the following weekend and had a long discussion. This was the most communication I'd ever gotten from the man in a year. We agreed to date again exclusively and communicate our needs. You can imagine how happy and full of hope I was. I mentioned that I wanted a title by the end of 2024. To me, 4 months, not counting the previous whole year together, was plenty of time to give me a title. He agreed. I don't disagree with that, Georgina. I told him this time around I wanted effort on his part, but I didn't expect 0 to 100% in weeks. Things started off great. I saw effort on his part, not a lot more, but more than before. I told myself I knew he was so, what? I knew how he was, so a little was actually a lot for someone like him. Then I started noticing old patterns again. Okay, let's take a moment here. I'll be really quick in saying this, but none of this is real change. This is Nick, and I understand why people think this. Like, don't get me wrong, I think we all go through a phase of this. That's totally normal, it's understandable. But this is not real change. Like him coming back to Georgina in this context, he's obviously left the freeze and gone to regret and missing the heck out of Georgina in this moment. He reached back out 6 months later. So that's, obviously his time for like regretting his decision making. And he's saying, yes, I'll do anything to try and make this work because in the moment, he's missing the heck out of you. But all that fear of intimacy hasn't gone anywhere. And I can understand how this would make me feel like you've got all your hopes and dreams in one go. But I've seen this play out time and time and time again. He hasn't changed, and this is going to be more of the same. So that's my little TED talk on that. What are your thoughts, Cody?
Yeah, I was gonna say for the viewers at home, here's a little pop quiz to see how much you have a grasp on avoidant tendencies. Did you think that this ending of the movie was going to be happy or sad? Because as soon as she was describing it, it's like I already know how this is going to end, And it's not me just being cynical. Like I just understand, like this guy is now out of his fight or freeze, fight, fawn response. His nervous system is stabilized, and now he's starting to reminisce. Or maybe he broke things off, or he got dumped by someone else. But the thing with an avoidant is they're almost always a dollar short and a day late. And you have to look at the timeline here. Is this vulnerability coming on the heels of them messing up, or is it being proactive? Usually it's not proactive, hence the avoidant part.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it makes me think too that he's the kind of guy who's probably very good at appeasing, at people pleasing, but it doesn't sound to me like he's really sat with the weight of what he's actually done and also gone to work on himself too. Because if he did, he actually wouldn't be coming back around like this. It would have been a very different approach altogether. This is someone who's coming from a place of desperation, not from a place of reconciliation.
Yeah, and my other impression is that she's still allowing her emotions to run her strategy right now for her dating and relationships here.
I'd say to Georgina's credit, like again, she didn't know what she didn't know. And if you've never been with a person like this, I can understand it being, you thinking, oh, this is going to get better. It's all going to be okay. And he's communicating like, oh my God, this is more than I've ever gotten from him. Maybe he's finally opened up. But as you said, I have to say, Georgina, just something to know in the future. One, these patterns are hardwired into people, and there ain't no fixing that shit until they really want to work on it. And two, I also just want to add that it's this has been a really great letter thus far in terms of like illustrating, just how easy it is to get hope for a person like this when they're saying all the right things, they did all the right things, especially when you were vulnerable post your marriage. Like I've seen so many clients who've gone through this sort of stuff too, and it's, beyond heartbreaking because you're looking at it and you're like, it's just like Game of Thrones. If you thought this had a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. So, anyways, let's continue. A week before Thanksgiving, I decided to bring up New Year's Eve. I didn't mention anything about the title. I simply said I wanted to go out to dinner and kiss at midnight. He mentioned how last New Year's Eve he made me feel like shit, and I didn't want to repeat of that. He didn't reply, which was unusual. Sorry, which wasn't unusual. He is the one to usually reply hours, a day, or even days later. Again, the communication wasn't great, so this was normal for me. He replied 2 days later, breaking up with. I'm laughing because it's like poetry. You know, he replied 2 days later, breaking up with me after you asked for communication yet again. Isn't it interesting how, and by the way, I want to make it very clear, Georgina, I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing at the situation. Like it's wild to me how, you were asking for the bare minimum of communication and that was his trigger to be like, I presume he probably said something similar. I can't give you what you deserve. And he said he felt a lot of pressure from the deadline of a title. Oh my fucking God. Said he wasn't in the right headspace to give me what I need and deserve. Yeah, you see, this stuff writes itself. I went over to talk in person because I felt he owed me that. I asked why he came back. He said he thought he could be that man for me, but he realized he couldn't. He said I give so much and he just can't reciprocate. I told him to make sure this is what he truly wanted because I couldn't do this again. He said it wasn't what he wanted, but it was what was fair to me. Said he knew he was disappointing me yet again, but he didn't want to waste any more of my time, knowing he couldn't give me what I deserved anytime soon. He is so dismissive in his avoidancy. Like, there's no like fearful avoidance in this. He used the work excuse again. He cried. I cried. I took everything from his house this time. Everything. And he didn't stop me. Good on you. I dropped off his things at his door the next day with a long letter thanking him for the memories and telling him I hoped this situation would make him look at his life and start to heal the inner him so that eventually he could let someone in long term. With tears in my eyes, I left. I left completely heartbroken once again. I spoke to his sister later that night, and she said that he has failed every relationship because of communication. We're going to come back to that point because we say communication, but that is not what's going on. And that he fears failure. Yeah, that's a thing that's going on. So if he doesn't commit, he doesn't fail. She said that she was actually surprised he broke things off with me both times because he's usually the type to ignore the person he is with until they leave him. He even did that to his ex-wife. She said that how he buries himself in work so he doesn't have to deal with emotions. She also said it was odd that he came back a second time because he's usually the one that doesn't. It made me feel good in a way. Like, okay, maybe his feelings were genuine all along. I'm gonna take a breath because I need to like just get my head sorted off the back of that. Because fuck me, Nick is. This is a great example of a dismissive avoidant. Like normally I've got the spicy, fearful avoidance, but this is like such a great DA example.
I feel bad for her for sure. And at this point, so she has some knowledge of attachment theory, right? She's been exposed to your content, but then she went back to him afterwards. So she's starting to get to the place where your head knows certain things, but your heart is still attached, and you're just basically in a slow motion car wreck at that point.
Yes. Yes. And this is a great point you've actually raised because it just goes to show, even for those of us that are going into this with awareness of attachment theory, our brain may be smart, but our heart and our trauma have a funny way of taking the car off the road.
Yeah, even as a trained clinician, and I'm sure you can relate to this, there's all sorts of things that we know cognitively, but emotionally, that's a totally different ball game, and it's sometimes hard to be disciplined. We're all human beings.
What are you talking about? I'm perfect. I don't have these problems.
You did describe your very secure attachment style earlier in the video, which was quite impressive. So, but I'm sure you've done lots of work around that. So it's all about what you invest in.
It's about all what you invest in. That's right. But I mean, all of this is like learning, right? Like, I mean, a hard way to learn, but we've all got to learn at some point. But I mean, you know, I feel sorry for Georgina because this sounds tragic. I'll give it to Nick. I feel sorry for him as well too, because it seems like, unlike Georgina, who's becoming more aware of this sort of stuff, I feel like Nick is nowhere near it. Excuse me. I feel like with Nick, he thinks it's down to his communication issues, but it's not the communication issues.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to unpack that right now because we can go back to that. The other thing that the sister mentioned was that, and I don't know if this is something that he directly told her or it was an assumption she was making, but if he doesn't commit to anything fully, then he can't fully fail, which is avoidant logic 101. And I've seen avoidants do this not just with relationships, but with work or with other endeavors that they try to pick up. And they don't always have conscious awareness of this. But in therapy, usually we can start to unpack things and they do get to the point where they're consciously like, yeah, I mean, I just don't fully commit because I don't want to fail. Like there's a crushing fear of failure.
Yeah, and I get it because, like, I mean, there is that fear of like, what would failure look like? Now, as someone who's intimate with failure, I got to tell you, it's the best gift you'll ever learn. You'll learn so much about yourself, and you'll actually learn what not to do. Um, but I will say that failure gets boring after a while, and you're like, okay, I want some success. This guy, it's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised, given that he runs two jobs, that he probably doesn't commit fully to either of them as well, too.
That's a fair observation for sure. Yeah, he's spinning plates in his life.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, just using that phrase you pointed out, I know a lot of dismissive avoidants have often said that exact phrase. They're often like, I am like juggling multiple plates at once, but can't really commit to any one of them.
by design most of the time, because then they don't have to face themselves and the negative emotions and beliefs that's just sitting right below the surface.
Yep. And the other thing we got to remember too is that all relationships are not going to be rainbows and butterflies, right? Like if we're getting deeper with people, things are going to get rocky from time to time. Now, we expect there to be certain elements of, we'd like to think that everything for the most part will be smooth sailing, but beyond a superficial relationship where things are smooth sailing, that's when things get much more intense and deep. And, it can be incredibly difficult for avoidant attachers, particularly dismissives, to properly invest in someone if they can only go very shallow in depth.
A lot of times anxious attachers will attempt to rationalize the situation by saying, well, Cody, no relationship is perfect, so I kind of should just put up with what I'm dealing with right now. And yes, of course, no relationship is perfect, and relationships, in order to thrive, they do require you to confront painful things that just organically surface, and then you move forward and you become stronger. But if your relationship, if it feels like you're just spinning your wheels and you don't ever actually get traction forward, then that's a good sign that you're in a trauma bond or you're in a mismatched situation with an avoidant. And after a while, you realize you're just arguing about the relationship itself. You're not actually going anywhere in life.
Yeah, 1 billion%. And my last point on this before we bounce to the next paragraph is, you know, I think it's very easy for also a lot of, anxious attachers to not only rationalize, but to have a lot of magical thinking around this sort of stuff. Things like, well, they're really just busy at work. Well, they're a bit quirky. Well, maybe they're neurodivergent and that's why they can't communicate very well. All relationships have their struggles. And it's like, yes, all of those may be true, but the bigger question is, how is this dynamic making you feel? And that's a harder question to answer because when you've been given a lot of, because the thing is, for a lot of anxious attachers, we've suffered emotional neglect. So we're running on empty. We think this person has the emotional buffet to give us what we need, which is understandable because we're running on empty. And so as a consequence, when the buffet has left the building and we're left with the scraps, we're still taking whatever pieces we can get and rationalizing why it's okay to be licking up crumbs off the floor.
Yeah, and if you're brought up in an environment where you were essentially breadcrumbed as a child, then your perspective of what a feast is going to be way off in the large scheme of things. So you don't have like a good scale to begin with.
No. Also, I don't know about you, Cody. Like, I mean, I don't know about you. I really, I used to. I don't want to say I used to. Maybe I still do. But avoidant love bombing can feel pretty good on
Oh, for
on a,
sure.
on an empty emotional stomach. It's pretty damn good.
I was gonna shoot a video and just talk about how like a roller coaster relationship or situation can be super exciting. Like I'm not denying that. I mean, it can be very exciting. It's unpredictable. You're getting your adrenaline pumping, especially if you are in a more depressed era of your life or you're feeling a little bit numb or disconnected from yourself. Then I mean, it can hit way different.
Oh,
That
completely.
doesn't justify, obviously, I'm saying, but it has its highs.
Yeah, completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. And I will say I have lost my mind over those experiences because often my heart then becomes hyperactivated and I'm like, got my love goggles on. Anyways, Georgina continues. Uh, so the following weekend, I knew he had a fancy event coming up for his aunt. He'd purchased tickets on my phone and left the reservation app open without realizing it a few weeks prior. I wasn't invited, but I didn't want to overthink it. He would actually do this a lot. He'd go to events by himself and he wouldn't invite me. He purchased 4 tickets. I knew who 3 were for, but not the fourth. Well, my toxic Latina came out of me and I stalked the stories of the event because I wanted to know who the fourth ticket was for. He came up in a story with another woman. He was never the touchy, affectionate type, so it wasn't like I could say, they are together. I made excuses for myself to make me feel better. It's just his sister or his aunt's plus one, because this was 2 days after the breakup. 2 days. I kept it all in and didn't bother messaging him as much as I wanted to. Something tells me that is not his sister or his aunt or anyone who's a relative. 2 weeks later, I texted him and asked if I could come over. I think I wanted validation that he still wanted me and to see English, still wanted me and to see if I'd see anything there like a hairbrush, etc. He agreed. No communication, nothing was said, nothing. We just had sex and I left. It happened again 2 weeks after. Mind you, there was still no communication about anything, but this time I told myself that this was absolutely the last time, as I just couldn't do it mentally. After Christmas, his sister-in-law posted a picture with him in it, along with the same girl from the event. That hurt. Seeing it hurt because it was very clear they were indeed together. So I decided then to email my resignation from work. I received no response. Nothing. No kind of acknowledgement that I was resigning from a position he knew that meant a lot to me. I think I'm just going to take a pause here. Knowing what we know about this guy and how difficult it was for him to return your gown, I imagine he shut down when he received that because it was too hard for him to see that probably, and he just probably was in a very disassociated state.
Yeah, I'm having some flashbacks. I heard the toxic Latina part, and then she's going over there to try to find like, oh, am I gonna find a comb or gonna find like stray hair? Like whose hair is this? She's freaking out, and the whole thing. So again, I feel bad for her because I've been in that anxious position where you're like, I just need to know what the situation is so I can move forward with my own life. Like I have to have a filled in picture, but you're never going to get a completely filled in picture. That's just not how reality works. And I know like your traumatized brain wants to fill it in as much as possible, but it's like looking at the car wreck. You don't have to look at the car wreck. I promise you, you can turn your head away. You can, stick to yourself. The temptation is going to be massive, but I'm telling you, looking at the car wreck just it doesn't help. It's always going to be bad.
True. And I think with regards to, seeing your ex move on with someone new, I've definitely gone through that a few times, and all I can say is it hurts. Like it really hurts to see that. And I think we desperately want to still have some control over the situation to make us feel better. I want to make it very clear that going back to something that Cody said a little while ago about monkey branching avoidance, if an avoidant monkey branches, it doesn't mean they don't care or have feelings for you. It just means this is one of their ways of dealing with their feelings because it's too hard for them. And on this note, I know a lot of people often wonder, and Cody and I were having this conversation privately a while ago. We were talking about, the concept of if they wanted to, they would. I'm not about to apply that logic to this conversation. But I know many dismissive avoidants who are chronically depressed. In fact, I'd say if you are dismissive avoidant, you are depressed by default because you're in the freeze, which is a high functioning form of depression. And many of them do not have the bandwidth to try and pursue someone they love for a whole bunch of reasons, namely because it feels hopeless to them. And I feel like I can use some of that, you know, explanation to describe what's going on here for Nick because it seems like anytime he's asked for more than he thinks he can give, he seems to get in over his head and feel hopeless about things, and he's not willing to go any further and invest any further. Doesn't mean he doesn't care about Georgina. No, it's just a case of if he would, sorry, if he could, he would.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I could add there. In the interest of time, we don't have to unpack all of it. As far as like if he wanted to, he would. I'll probably bookmark that maybe for later. But the when we're in an emotional state of mind, we want to engage in black and white thinking because it makes our reality more simple. And maybe we could talk more about this too. It could be during this podcast or maybe a different letter, but that stems from polyvagal theory, correct? That freeze state that you're referring to, that avoidance get into.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we could talk about with that, but I think that's an important point you're touching on is the comorbidity with mood disorders and avoidance, which isn't always talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I think that a lot of people, like I know, for example, there are people who, as described by Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, live in a lot of passivity. They live in a lot of indolence and I don't want to call it laziness, but anxiety over, what if I screw this up? What if I, don't make this right? They live in perpetual fear of ever just sort of stepping out for themselves and making a mistake. And I think that Nick might be one such guy where he's maybe a very passive man who doesn't know how to, really have the courage to make a mistake and get it wrong.
I like to call, because you made the comparison between avoidant attachment and an addiction, let's say alcoholism. which is a comparison I use a lot. I call it they're on avoidahol. Um, People who are like actively in addiction or functional addicts, they run around with tons of anxiety every single day. And when it comes to a relationship, it's not that your avoidant partner or ex-partner didn't care at all. They're not sociopaths, but their ability to care is blocked by all these anxieties and this crushing self-doubt, and just all the things that are rattling around in their mind. But I also like to use the comparison. It's like if you're emotionally available and you've done work on yourself, when you're in a relationship, you're like a bicycle with 10 gears, and you expect your partner to, relatively speaking, have the same amount of gears. You want a 10-gear bicycle. But an avoidant, it's not that they don't care at all. It's that they're capped at, let's say, 5 gears. They can't consistently get to 10 gears with you. Sometimes it could be because they don't want to tap into that 10th gear, or they just don't have those extra 5 gears. It really doesn't matter on your end because they're not meeting you where you're at.
Correct. Correct. And so, in a very sort of flimsy way, I guess we could say if they wanted to, they would. But it doesn't. The problem with that phrase too is it will never properly unpack the complexity of a situation. And I think people, and I know Georgina hasn't used that phrase. I've just plucked it for the sake of it. It's the last thing I'll say on this before we continue. But I think a lot of people tend to cling on to that phrase because it hurts. It feels like it makes sense for some of these situations. But the reality is that it will never at times properly explain the complexity of, if you want to use the phrase, avoidaholism.
Right. I think if he wanted to, he would. It has its place, but you have to control for a lot of other variables if you use it. And there's usually a window in the timeline where it applies the most. A lot of times it's in the very early stages of talking to somebody.
Not like this.
Once you're past that, yeah, then you start to get into attachment styles pretty quickly. I mean, they're always present, but from a dating standpoint, sometimes the phrase can be helpful to apply because the reality is sometimes people are going to be low interest in you. But how that manifests it's going to depend on their attachment style. So,
Yep, I 100% agree. The devil is in the detail. Anyways, Georgina writes, Nick was still on my social media at the time of when I resigned and was the one who was the first to watch all my stories. I just couldn't bring myself to take him off as I knew once I took him off social, it meant things were real and there was no more access to each other. Been there, done that, I can relate. His birthday was at the beginning of January. Oh, sorry, just a moment here. I was thinking to myself for a minute, I'm like, wait a minute, is he in Aquarius? But then I remembered that's actually like late January, early Feb, because I know a lot of avoidants are actually Aquarius in their charts. But anyways, sorry, that was just a quick bit of pop quiz. No, it probably means he's a Capricorn. Anyways, and it took every ounce of me not to wish him happy birthday. Then that weekend, his sister posted a picture of them celebrating, and the same girl was in the picture. He's tagged on all of these, but never reposted them on his own social media. He was never one to post or repost, and when I would bring it up, he never wanted me to post anything of us together. So it was like we were just a secret. When I saw the picture, I decided to remove him and his sister from social media. Good on you. It hurt knowing that his sister was okay with posting a picture with that girl only a few weeks after the breakup, but would then never post anything with me in it. So this felt very intentional. Yep, I agree. And what hurt more was knowing that it was very clear he was talking to this woman at the same time as he and I were supposedly trying again. Yep. A quick backstory on his childhood. I don't know a lot because, again, there was very little communication. His parents divorced at an early age. His mum raised him and she passed away from cancer when he was a teen. Ouch. His sister, who he is super close to, got the same kind of cancer at the same time as the mum, but went into remission and is now doing great. He joined the military after high school, stepped on a bomb while overseas, and went through a lot of dark times dealing with losing his leg. Shit me dead, that's terrible. He has lost a lot of close friends to suicide. This is stuff I know from podcasts he's been on and whatnot. Anytime I try and ask him about the personal stuff, he was very closed off and almost felt offended. And now looking back, he was never one to ask about anything on my end. I mean, the level of no communication this man does is pretty unreal. Yet on Zoom meetings and podcasts, you can't shut him up. But in person, he's a fucking mute. I want to take a moment here. Firstly, I'm actually sorry for everyone involved here, Georgina, for being on the receiving end of this because you don't deserve to be, you don't deserve to go through what, Nick's unhealed trauma is putting you through. But I just want to say, I also do feel sorry for Nick for the sake of the fact that it's like he's gone through a lot of fucking shit. And, it seems to me like whilst on a podcast which doesn't have a lot of connection on it, it's okay for him to blab about stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if he gets more intimate, particularly with a woman. It's very hard for him to do that because of loss of mum. He's got this really big relationship with his sister. And before I take a breath, it also seems to me as though, the way he's treating you is probably how he felt growing up, meaning that he's raised on, very little emotional tenderness and love, and that's what you're getting. I am not excusing the behavior, but it does help to explain it.
For sure. I wonder at what point she gained those details about him. I don't know if she just said that or not, but I mean, that would have been helpful for us to know all those things in the very beginning here. I mean, I'm sure she probably would agree with us too, like if she had it all laid out. But so there's a lot of like really important things there, especially from the standpoint of a clinician looking at it. So he's military, a veteran, and it looks like he suffered an injury from a bomb, an IED, probably in the Middle East or wherever he was operating. But so PTSD potentially, um, emotional unavailability, which is going to make sense based off of his childhood experiences as well, and also too just being in the military itself. I say it can be a red flag. Obviously, there's emotionally available veterans, first responders, military, but just being in the military, especially if you are in a position, let's say being an infantryman, it breeds avoidance because your job is to put things into a box and to not unpack that box. At least not when you're out there operating in a war zone. Like you don't have the luxury of unpacking things emotionally in those type of situations. So it's very hard to transition from that type of lifestyle to being in an emotionally available, reciprocated relationship intimately.
Yep, I completely agree with everything you've said. I want to make it clear, I'm not against anyone who's in the army, but we have to also consider the impact of PTSD from military service on one's capacity to connect with people. But I think the damage was done well before he entered the military. It was probably just exacerbated by his service. And I think that, whatever his time in the service did to him, it probably would have been an extra layer of resistance to connecting with other people as well too. So that's just my 2 cents on that one. But I know many veterans who are avoidantly attached. And to their credit, they're fucking great at it because, as Cody was saying, they can just compartmentalize. Again, not every veteran is avoidantly attached, but just saying, it's definitely up there. Let's finish this letter off because we've only got a couple of paragraphs left. So now, 3 months post breakup and 2 months full blown no contact, I still find myself questioning things a lot. Why did he come back? Am I not worthy of him trying to work on himself? Should I have never sent that New Year's Eve text that triggered him? If I'm his person, why let me go again? Did he truly love me? Why lie and tell me all this bullshit instead of telling me he met someone new? Did it even bother him that I quit and took him off social media? I feel kind of lost in a way. People have asked me what will I do when he comes back again. But would he even try again? If he did, I can't trust him in my heart again. He let me go twice. He told me twice I deserve better, and yet I didn't believe it. But what if he goes to therapy? So many questions. Can you see where I'm at mentally and emotionally? I'm mad for letting him back in my life, but at the same time, I tell myself it was a lesson. Yet I still can't find the anger in me to fully just say, fuck him. I don't know why it's so hard to let him go this time around, even though I know he's cheated on me. And maybe part of it is now that I'm forced to sit in my pain and feel it. Because the first time around, not only was I still working for him and essentially communicating work-related things, but I had him on social media, plus had another guy entertaining me. So I never had time to process and feel the breakup versus now. Cody, you're on the money with that, what you said earlier about, what's the role of dating in that moment. I'm nearly done. I know I fell in love with the potential, yet I still can't seem to just let him go and move on with my life. And even though I understand more about attachment theory and understand what wounds his behavior comes from, it still doesn't make it okay to leave a trail of broken hearts. Completely agreed. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Well, we got some time to go through the last couple of paragraphs, particularly all the questions. I'll take a breath. Cody, what are your thoughts on all this?
I have a couple different thoughts. What are your thoughts on the possibility that maybe Georgina leans towards being a fearful avoidant?
It's interesting you should say that. I'm actually going to say definitely anxious, but I guess I'm not sensing anything. I guess the only thing that I would say is maybe is a bit fearful avoidant was the urgency to rush in and find a new relationship immediately post breakup. But I mean, that in and of itself isn't enough for me to be like, that's a fearful avoidant behavior. But I mean, yeah, it could be a bit of that in the attachment style. Definitely anxious tendencies. Like I think that's for sure going on here. But yeah, it's interesting you should say that. What was your reason for speculating on that?
Well, maybe not. She's maybe not a fearful avoidant, but there seems to be a tendency, perhaps due to being severely anxiously attached, where she's avoiding doing her own processing and she is throwing herself into these trauma bonded type situations, which can unconsciously serve the purpose of not looking inward.
True. I mean, to be fair to Georgina, and I mean, I can speak for her from this, is to say that, like, I was definitely in her shoes in my own version of this story for sure. When I think of severe anxious attachment, I sort of think of someone who is more on like the loud end of anxious attachment, someone who's like, you know, getting, who's like really, exhibiting all those classic protest behaviors of quadruple texting, raging at the thought of you, going anywhere without them, needing you to be in the same home with them at all times, isolating you. And I mean, again, some of those behaviors also overlap with personality disorders. So maybe my definition of severe is not the same as yours, but definitely in the depths of that anxious attachment where I'd say, for Georgina, I think, this is the thing with emotional unavailability meeting anxious attachment is we can be very unavailable to ourselves in these situations, and we often struggle with magical thinking. We struggle with not having a strong sense of self to answer a lot of these questions. We're very disconnected from our intuition. So a lot of the questions that Georgina's asking at the end here I think are very reasonable given the circumstances, but are also very consistent with someone who I think has not only been deeply traumatized by an avoidant blindside, but I think is also textbook anxious attachment.
Yeah, perhaps I'll add too, it's as you know, and as you've seen, it's very well possible to start off maybe just leaning a little bit towards anxious attachment, but when you're in these type of situations, it can chip away at your sense of security and you can become more and more anxiously attached over time.
Yeah,
Sometimes people don't really realize that, but a bad relationship can push you in either direction negatively for sure.
yeah, completely agreed. Completely agreed. I was going to say, with the remaining time we have, should we just quickly spitfire some answers to some of these questions that she has in terms of like some of
Sure.
the ruminating thoughts?
Let's do it.
I'm happy to ask these of you, and I'm happy to throw in my own 2 cents if it's appropriate. So, why do you think Nick came back? I mean, I feel like we answered that.
Why did Nick come back? Because he's a dismissive avoidant, and that's what dismissive avoidants tend to do. You like to use the term boomerang, which I like that. He boomerangs back. So yeah, I mean that's kind of part and parcel with the avoidant pattern, let's call it.
Yep, I think that's true. And it can happen, especially for fearfuls, it can happen a lot more. Is just when they calm down, they can feel regret and return, but it's not always guaranteed they will return.
Also, too, if you have this mentality that you're never gonna go full 100% in a relationship, you're not gonna fully commit, then you're always halfwaying things. So maybe this gives you some sense of solace. But I'm highly skeptical that he's going 100% with other women if he hasn't done inner work on himself. So he's again spinning plates. He's going halfway with all these different situations or relationships. And it's not fair in the sense that he is probably leaving a trail of broken hearts. But to maybe add some humanity on his side of things, it sounds like he has a lot of emotional things that he hasn't addressed. Should he address them? Sure, of course,
Yeah.
but of course. Um, but we're all wired to connect at the end of the day. We have that desire, and sometimes we go about it in misguided, not so great ways. But I think he's trying to navigate his own kind of stuff right now, and maybe not as well or sophisticated as he could or should, but
Yep, I completely agree, Cody. I completely agree. So the next one was, am I not worthy of him trying to work on himself?
That's an interesting question. And I get variations of that question pretty often, but I wouldn't frame it like that. Um, he is on his own journey, and if he's not working on his own things, like he's gonna reap negative consequences due to that. And I wouldn't tie in your self-worth to his own stuff. And I know that's easier said than done, but I would try my very hardest to try to separate those things in your mind.
Yep, completely agreed. Um, if I'm quote unquote his person, why let me go again? Did he truly love me?
I don't think he's your person. That's my personal impression. If she wants a direct answer, your person isn't going to monkey branch to other women and then circle back when that fizzles out and tries to get you back on the hook. But even then, he's not even 100% committing when he does boomerang back. So, does that sound like your person? Is that who you want your person to be?
No, I think she meant that from the other way around. Like, if she's his person, why would he let me go again?
Okay, on his side.
Yeah,
But okay, so that's a good point too. Is if someone is if they're not working on their avoidant tendencies, and let's say that they're actively addicted to avoidahol, um, then they're no one's person.
I
At
love that.
least
I love that name, by the way.
they're going to be no one's person because a dismissive avoidant, and this is something that you come to realize is that push comes to shove, you crunch all the numbers, they negatively view relationships, generally speaking. To them, it is another stressor. And you can exchange yourself with anyone else. It doesn't change their beliefs about relationships.
Yep, yep. I completely agree. And I understand the whole thing of like, if I'm his person, why let me go again? Logically, this makes no sense at all. Like, and this is where I have to teach everyone a little fun lesson because everyone tends to do this. So I'm here to just remind everyone, don't look at these situations logically. There is no logic in these actions. Look at it emotionally. He told you, you're my person. He probably meant that. So why would he let you go? Because even though on one hand he has a part of him which absolutely believes this, there is a greater part of him which fears what that actually involves. To have you means to be committed to you, and that is something he will not do.
Yeah, it goes back in my mind to the bike analogy. As of right now, he is a 5 speed bicycle that's saying he's going to show up as a 10 speed for you.
That's a really good analogy.
Thank you. I made it up myself.
But it's really good because it really illustrates the whole idea of like he is over promising and under delivering. But it doesn't mean to say that his over promising isn't genuine, meaning that, and this is where people get it twisted. They think, oh, they're future faking, therefore the faking component means it's fake. It's like, no, 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 no. They're enthusiastic as hell about trying to make this work. But when push comes to shove, they will never be able to get to that 10, which they're trying to achieve because all their fears hit them like a freight train.
I've used the term future faking in an older video that I shot. And I just used it because I wanted to see if it would resonate with people because that's how emotionally people on the other side of an avoidant feel. They feel like they were future faked, but I don't think it's the best term necessarily to use on the avoidance side because they're not doing it necessarily in a manipulative, like scheming way. Um, they're writing checks that their nervous system can't cash. Essentially, would be another way
Yep.
to put it.
Maybe it's as simple as they're just over promising.
Yeah, it goes back to that. And I mean, that's, sales 101. They always say you want to under promise, over deliver. Same thing with relationships. You don't want to start writing checks that you're not going to cash or you don't have the capacity to cash.
No, and I think this is where I'm going to finish off because I've got to run shortly, is to say just because someone is giving you a lot of, we'll use some of the stuff you've said, if they're giving you a lot of checks that are, being cashed in the early stages of dating, understand that's because they're in rest and digest at that particular stage, or at the very least, even if they're actually in a high functioning freeze, they're not scared of their attachment issues haven't flared up at that particular point. In the early days, oh yeah, we can, make this like Aladdin and Jasmine, if you will, go out on a magic carpet. But the minute this starts to go to a certain level of intimacy, that's when there's no more, checks to be cashed in.
And to a severe avoidant, I think people sometimes underestimate how powerful their anxiety can be. Like I went on a date with I believe she's fearful avoidant. I'm not going to spend too much time trying to diagnose her, but I could just like palpably tell she was extremely anxious when I was on the date with her. You could just pick up on the energy. So I do have empathy for avoidance for sure, because a lot of them suffer from severe anxiety, and it's not always surface level anxiety. Sometimes it's kind of buried deep down, but that anxiety can be visceral. A lot of times, because I work with a lot of avoidance in my coaching practice, and a lot of our work revolves around essentially a flavor of exposure work when it comes to becoming less avoidant. And it's exposing themselves to that really, really horrible anxiety that they feel. It can be crushing.
Yep, completely agree. So, Georgina, just to round out, thank you very much for your letter. That was amazing. It was a great example of a dismissive avoidant relationship. I'm sorry that you've gone through this. A little bit sorry for Nick as well, because obviously his experiences are tough, but it doesn't give him an excuse to do what he's doing to women, and especially to you, because it sounds like it's destroyed you emotionally. So I'm sorry you've gone through this. Just very quickly, Cody, do you have anything to say just as you're rounding out and where people can find you?
Yeah, my last piece of advice to Georgina would be to block and walk. Now, easier said than done, but that would be my personal recommendation. Because he might have good qualities, but you don't want to continue to give someone like that access to you if he's hurting your nervous system. So that's not the guy for you. You can find me codyweldon.com, or you can go to Ken's website as well, and you can book sessions with me that way.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone. I'll catch you guys around for the next letter reading. And other than that, I look forward to speaking to you guys then.